greater role in the battle against terror as part of a major security overhaul. This morning, the government will introduce a new bill into Parliament to ramp up counter-terrorism measures, and Attorney General Christian Porter joins me now. Christian, good morning to you. Explain exactly what the Army's role in a terrorist situation could be if the bill passes.
So throughout Australia's entire history, and prior to the introduction of this law, of course, Defence Force weapons were only ever legally and, in actuality, aimed away from our shores, from our borders. And of course, their purpose was to repel foreign troops armed with similar high-grade military weapons. Now, Australia's gun laws means nobody in Australia can legally possess those kinds of weapons. They're really restrictive. With the millions or billions by now they spend on multiple agencies on surveillance and monitoring the border, there's an extremely minimal chance anyone would have those weapons in sufficient numbers to ever warrant a military response. So why now, at this point in our history, that legally they want to be able to turn the Army's machine guns on inwards at Australian citizens? All right, let's continue.
Well, the present situation is that ADF assets wouldn't be deployed to protect Australian lives in a terrorist situation unless a very high threshold to be reached, which is that the state ability to deal with the terrorist threat was completely overwhelmed. Now, as you can imagine, that's an incredibly high barrier to cross, and you wouldn't even be able to make that determination until well into a terrorist event that had unfolded.
Justification is for terrorists and terrorist attack. And I guess a terrorist may or may not be an Australian citizen. So I'll just clarify my opening statement there that it's the first time the Army has legally been able to shoot in a non-war situation. I guess if there's an invasion, they certainly will be allowed to shoot, but in a non-war situation, they can start firing their machine guns around the place during a terror attack. And when you look at the terror attacks we've had so far, fake, except for obviously Curtis Cheng, he got killed, but even then, whether it was terror or whether you could just argue it was a young guy who was a bit mentally deranged, well, there you go. But obviously, Mayor Monis, how could he get into the city with a gun undetected while he's on parole for murder? Could never ever happen. And the latest one, you got the ones in between, Minto with his knife, and the Bangladeshi girl, she stabbed poor old Roger. I mean, it's just laughable. It's just laughable. There is no justification. What has happened so far? For suddenly, all of a sudden, we're going to have the Army running around with the police, ready to start shooting people up. Oh, this is a joke.
So the Turnbull government has considered that. We're changing the legislation. We've done that cooperatively with all the states and territories. The standard will now be a judgment as to whether or not the ADF has assets or personnel or skills that can be brought to bear to enhance the response and protect Australian lives.
What he's just said there is absolutely ridiculous. The police are there to try and keep us safe, whether they do or not, or just collect revenue. Okay, they're more mop and bucket guys. They never actually get to a scene and prevent a crime. They just gather evidence, and then if they can find him, if they bother to, they'll put someone before a court for robbing a liquor shop or something. But police have got guns to protect us, supposedly. Now, if it reaches a stage where there is a military threat that matches an army's ability, and we require an army's ability to meet it, well, we're in a wartime situation. The army is there to fight wars. And if you've got them inside your own borders, well, you're invaded and you're in a war. If the police are unable to protect the citizens, like I said, not that they do too much or try too hard, but if they can't and you need the army, guess what? You're in a war.
Okay, how will that work from a practical and logistical point of view? Because there needs to be a clear delineation in responsibilities and when one takes over. And sometimes that's going to be pretty grey and it's going to be on the hop.
Well, so the command and control structure would be that the ADF assets or personnel would be under the command of the ADF, but they would act on instructions from the state command authority.
What if it was actually for what they said it was, and an actual terror attack, which is never ever going to be used for? And you know that because, okay, so the instructions are given by the state, but the command is by the ADF. So what if the instructions are bad? What if the intel's bad? What if they choose to ignore it and do something else, and then a whole lot of people are killed, and you got all this argument like police, local area commands blame each other. They can't even sort it out. That man Monis was, all cops are all pointing a finger at each other. That Kath Byrne deleted all her texts and everything. Could you imagine adding the army into that absolute mess? And look, they know it would never work, and it's not ever going to work like that. It's for something else. I'll get to that in a minute.
And this approval would only occur with Prime Ministerial sign-off or the two relevant ministers after consultation with the states. But the types of situations, Carl, we're looking at are perhaps long siege situations or...
Well, it's been a bit vague there, like how long is long? And also, the police are equipped. You just got a microphone or communication and you're negotiating with them. How's sending in the army going to help those negotiations? And the police have already got machine guns. They're already heavily armed and they can shoot to kill. Still don't see the need for the army.
If something terrible like the Paris attacks happened in Australia where you've got multiple geographically spread coordinated violence, these are the types of situations.
I'm not sure which Paris attack he's talking about, either the truck or that Charlie Hebdo or something, but I don't recall the army, the French army being called in, so, well, maybe they were, I just don't recall it, but I still can't see any justification for the army. And what he did touch on, though, was multiple, in different areas, sieges or attacks. Well, I think he might be just about referring to what this is about, which is protests.
Situations, or, in the terrible situation of a chemical or biological attack, the ADF has very particular skills that could be brought to bear.
He's just thrown in this extra justification, something about chemical or biological weapons. Well, they could just have special legislation for that contingency. They don't need a blanket one so that the army can just go in all guns a-blazing, which is what they're going to bring in. Look, I thought about 5 to 10 years down the track, but it could happen as early as this year, because they've just got all the laws in now, and they'll get this one through. They'll be desperate to get this one through. And I like how they play it down. Remember earlier on when I just said this is a monumental change in Australia to have the army with laws that allows it to fight inside Australia's borders when there's no war. That's just unheard of. That's just utterly ridiculous. But they just built up this terror with all those fake hoaxes, and they've just worked on the minds of people, and everyone's just dumbly going, oh yeah, gee, that sounds about right, without doing any thinking about it or thinking it through and what it actually means. But that's what it actually means. This collapse. There was a thing on one of the financial magazines back in 1988 where they said by 2018 there'd be a global currency, and I'll tell you, they could drop that thing really, really quickly, because they've got that legislation they're trying to get through in Canberra to do with the financial emergency legislation. They're trying to get that through, but the CEC, the Citizens Electoral Council, has been putting in submissions to have that made more of a Glass-Steagall type. I don't want to go into too many details, but that's what the Americans used to have but don't have now, to stop investment banks from gambling and sending actual banks, commercial banks where people have money, into debt, into insolvency, which is where we're headed, see, because what's going to happen is on a Friday afternoon, they've been having a few little glitches, haven't they, where you haven't been able to get money out of the ATM, and we've just had a few viruses and glitches, and getting people used to those little emergencies, making it like they're just the norm. But there's going to be, when they become insolvent, they're not going to tell anybody. They are not going to say, by next week, the banks are going to be insolvent, because everyone just get their money out. And with this fractional reserve banking, what they say that our banks create money out of nothing. They actually don't. What they do is they lie on the statements. I'll have to do a video about that. Fractional reserve banking is just a load of bullshit. They're not creating money out of nothing, because the money's actually not there. That's how they go insolvent. If they could create money out of nothing, they can never go insolvent. They just go, we'll just create more money. Here we go. We've got plenty of money now. So they cannot. They can only ever borrow it from the people that create the money, which is overseas. That's why you have credit squeezes. Big topic. I won't go into that right now. But for the purpose of this video, they're not going to announce it. It's going to be a Friday afternoon. The ATMs aren't working. All the news outlets are going to have all their scripts, which is, they're working on it. And then it's going to take a while. And then suddenly it's going to dawn on people, hang on a minute. There's nothing here. I've got no money, because that's where they're going to institute the bail-in. That's those emergency laws that I was just talking about a second ago. That enables the bail-in, where they could just take your money straight from your account like they did in Cyprus. And when that happens and people realise, that's when they're not going to be happy. And these protests, these what he calls multiple scattered instances of violence, well, they're going to be people saying, where's my money? This isn't right. And it's going to dawn on everyone, finally, been in a big stupor, and they're going to try and take action. But they've got everything. They've got all of their ducks lined up, which is they will grab any leaders who try to get serious protests going, and they will arrest them for terror, and they don't have to give them bail. They can keep them without charge, and they can convict them, and they can not have any parole, and then they can be kept indefinitely on a balance of probability. That's how they'll take care of them. And for the masses, the sort of the dull hard sort of us who, well, not us, we sort of understand, but the majority of people who just, are just angry and start running at, I don't know, gated communities, or down where Kate Langbroke lives, or wherever they're going to fence everybody off from, because they're moving everyone out of those places now. I'll get into that a bit later on. They're going to use, of course, the Martin Place laws. Remember that tent city? They brought in laws. They can move people on, and then if they get violent, no, that's a terror. They're against the state, because that's all it needs. An act of violence that is against that has an ideology against the government. That's all terror is. That's all it is. And they'll be deploying the army. Now, they're going to have trouble. I guess they're doing it for, they can bring in extra troops, because the police have got shoot to kill laws. There might be too many for them to handle. But also, what they can do is they can bring in those mercenaries from overseas, put them in Australian Army fatigues, because they all wear balaclavas. You can't see who they are. Because I would imagine not many diggers. Look, it's hard to judge what a soldier can and can't do, and really, morally, they're obeying orders, but they're doing the right thing. It's a hard thing, so that's going to be a case by case basis. But you're going to have a lot of diggers who probably aren't going to want to do it, and that's where they'll be using those mercenaries dressed up, and the army platoons will be going, who's that? I haven't seen them before. It must be someone else, or we created a new platoon, easy. And they only really need to shoot the first. Just say you got 100 people, and they'll just shoot dead 5 to 10 like they do in Venezuela, and the rest 95 will just run back. No one wants to die, but you still won't have your money. That's what's coming. Do you want to see the debt? Well, go and have a look yourself. Go Australian debt clock. It's up over 800 billion. I heard today someone say it was less than 600 billion. No, total government debt is over $800 billion, and we'll be we're in a lot of trouble. So, yeah, like I said, they're not going to announce, 5 days' time, it looks like the banks are going to be insolvent. No way. They're going to spring it on everyone. That's how this is all going to unfold. All right, and that's what this law's for. Just another one of their ducks they've lined up. They've got it all planned. It's not for the Bangladeshi woman or for ISIS running around with his knife. It's not for them, of course, and you all know that. People that come to my channel know that, so I'm stating the obvious, I guess. All right, that's it.